I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and just would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, which we've called The Practice of Leadership for Nonprofit Organizations. And I'm just so excited because today is the launch of IntegralOrg's offering in the leadership space. And what we have in store today is a concise snapshot of greater, more comprehensive curriculum that we have on leadership. My name is Liz Tang, and I use the she, her pronouns, and I'm the education coordinator for IntegralOrg. And I'll be around to host and monitor the chat and any sort of tech support. So without further ado, let's get going. So we find it's important to acknowledge that what we call Alberta is the traditional and ancestral territory of many peoples, presently subject to Treaty 6, 7, and 8, namely the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis people of Alberta. This includes the Métis settlements and the 6 regions of the Métis Nation of Alberta within the historical Northwest homeland. June marks Indigenous History Month here in Canada, which is a fantastic opportunity to honor the stories and the achievements and immense contributions of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada. For me personally, I think that reconciliation is not only about stepping aside and uplifting Indigenous voices, but it is also about recognizing the ways in which we can learn from Indigenous ideology and incorporate their teachings into our lives and our work. I recognize that the Indigenous diaspora is very diverse, but commonly Indigenous leaders are experts at deeply valuing community and benefiting the whole and collaborative consensus building processes. So there's so much value there in considering the many ways that we can all arrive to leadership. And I welcome you all to reflect on these thoughts alongside myself as we go through today's session. And I've already expressed, but we are just so blown away and so grateful with the response for today's topic. And so with many new attendees on the list, I thought we would introduce what IntegralOrg does to those who are new to us. So we're a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits in key management areas such as board governance, strategic planning, and risk management through education, legal services, as well as in-depth development projects. So we'd like to say here that your mission and your success is our mission. And with that, I am very happy to introduce today's facilitators, who themselves I've experienced firsthand are wonderful leaders. So let's spotlight Mike here. He is the president and CEO of IntegralOrg, and he has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 25 years and is recognized for his ability to inspire nonprofit organizations to tackle complex issues and create sustainable solutions to organizational and community issues. And we also have Leslie Tamagi here, who has more than 25 years experience as CEO of diverse organizations and understands firsthand the complex challenges facing management, staff, and boards in the nonprofit sector. So I want to hand it over to our facilitators just to share why they feel today's topic is important to them. So let's start with Leslie, and then we'll go to Mike. So Leslie, why is nonprofit leadership important to you?
Thanks, Liv. Great question. I guess when I started, well, there's lots of things I think about in this question, but when I started consulting about 8 years ago, I had this great opportunity to meet with all those people that you connect with over your career. And you think, oh, they're such an interesting person, we should go for coffee, and you never actually get the time to do it. So I thought, well, I'm going to go meet with those people. And so I started reaching out to leaders in our sector, and it just kind of snowballed. And, honestly, I wish I'd written a book, but over the course of about 8 months, I met with about 100 nonprofit leaders, and I was so struck by their passion, of course, but also just how desperate they were to talk to somebody who understood their role and understood the ups and downs and the challenges and, the immense responsibility and how much they just wanted to talk. And so it really made me think about the importance of supporting leaders in our sector, and how I really wanted to bring leaders together to share their experiences and to learn from each other. And that's really been kind of the genesis of some of the leadership development work that I've had the opportunity to do and that I'm really excited about because there's more coming. And Mike.
I think you should write a book. I think you could write a book about leadership, with your eyes closed. Well, that'd be hard, I suppose. I would echo, I think, what you said, Leslie, that certainly in our work, we get to work with a lot of nonprofits every week. And I think it's always a privilege to see inside organizations, how they're run, how they're led, how they're governed. And just that idea that, it's a tough job being a CEO, or at any level, just a CEO. I think we'll talk about leadership in a much broader context, but it's a lonely job and it's a tough job. But I'm also just amazed at the things I learned about leadership, watching different people in different contexts, in different parts of the province, in different types of organizations. And that to me has just been something that over the course of my career is to try to understand, for me, what does leadership mean for me? I've had the privilege of working with some really outstanding leaders. I've had the challenge of working with leaders who are not outstanding. But it's not so much about them and their leadership, it's about me and who I am and what do I need to learn and where I need to grow. And so as we move into this work in terms of IntegralOrg, it is certainly not, it is an offering, it is something that we want to extend to the sector, but it's also still a very personal piece of work for us. It's an ongoing journey. We don't call this a program, it's a pursuit. It's a passion. It is a development process that will take your lifetime. So today, I think what we're going to talk about is a number of these things. We're going to set some context to this. One of the challenges about talking about leadership is this is an hour-long introductory webinar, and we do lots of introductory work for hour-long webinars, but to cram leadership into an hour, we could do days of talking about what leadership is, what are the styles, what are the things, what are the tips, tricks, the frameworks that people use to do this. We're going to give you some, but recognize there's lots of other stuff out there. There's lots of materials, and you'll come to what is relevant to you. But we'll set some context, do a bit of definitions, give you a bit of the need for this kind of work. We'll talk about what we call the 3 domains of leadership, which in this case, we'll talk about self and organizational level leadership, and then systems change or working in community. Some myths, because I think we tend to misunderstand leadership or put expectations on leadership sometimes that are sometimes justified, sometimes not. And then we'll end it off with what is our new offering here at IntegralOrg. It's called Elevated Leadership, and what that we hope to see all of you at. We have no room for 250 people, but hey, we can scale up, I'm sure. That's good leadership. So I just wanted to set why we're doing this, and the personal side, why it's important, and the need for leaders. I think we probably understand that. But this is leadership, and the need to build out and to be intentional about leadership development is not a new issue in this sector. For decades, I think people have been talking about their impending retirements or the dearth of leaders out there, and I don't think that has shifted a whole lot. In fact, I would suspect that through COVID, we're seeing there's more of a need for leadership development. So our good friends at Betreo, our fundraising consultants here in Calgary, did a report this spring and reviewed a number of leadership programs. So every leadership program we could tell in the nonprofit space in Canada. And some of the findings they came up with is that there's just a lack, the pool of talent out there for leaders is smaller than it used to be. There's not great leaders, doesn't mean there's not great people who aspire to leadership, but the idea that you can certainly go to the market and find somebody to lead at any level of organization, I think that's being challenged these days. The supply does not equal to the demand right now. So we have this mismatch that we either choose to accept or accept the consequences. 10 years ago, I had the privilege of writing a report with Jeff Braun about leadership in the nonprofit sector. And 10 years ago, we found that, again, people highly motivated, but there's no systems in place. There's very few nonprofit leadership, type development opportunities in Alberta here. So that has not changed. But one of the things we're seeing, next slide, please, Liz, is that that this is not a small undertaking. The reason, if this was easy to do, I think it would be out there. There'd be lots of pieces out there. There are some great ones out there. There's Rose Foundation that works in the space. There's other places that do some pieces of it. It's a large sector. And so to do this well, there needs to be more players in it, more opportunities, more places for people to come together to explore what leadership is and who they are in that place. So there needs to be a critical mass that does this. We need to take this a little more serious than we have, because this is a major undertaking. It's a risky undertaking. It is one that I think we go into with a very sense of humility, a little daunting, but one we also is very important, and it's important for I think the sector that I think we all love to serve. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about when we talk about leadership, we'll talk about sort of the different ways that people lead and different domains, different things. But when we talk about leadership, you are speaking into the future. And we are speaking into what is coming next. And there's not a lot of sort of day-to-day management in some of these positions. We're going to talk about how we create the future together. To do that, though, I'd like to get your thoughts on what traits or characteristics you think are important. So I'm going to go back to Liz here. We're going to do a little bit of a Slido type thing, and Liz will walk us through. So I want to hear what you think are those valued traits or the traits or characteristics you most admire in a leader. So we'll give you some structure for that. Liz?
Yeah, so if you do want to whip out your smartphone, you can scan this QR code, or if you prefer to go through your browser, go to slido.com and put that code in at the bottom. And I will just switch over to the poll right now. So you'll be presented with a few choices, and then you will just choose of these, I believe, 6 choices. What is the value, trait, or characteristic you value most? And then we'll have fun watching this poll change.
People are having trouble finding, you have to go to the poll in the top right-hand corner if you're on your phone.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so there'll be a Q&A tab and there'll be a polls tab, and you'll have to click on the polls tab. We have 109 folks on the call today, so we'll see. We got 40 some people on the poll. Cool.
It is not looking good for intelligent, I'll tell you that.
And after this poll, we'll kind of debrief why these are the traits that we presented. All right, seems to be slowing down, so.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, folks. I mean, it is remarkable, I think, when you do this to see what pops up. And this is based on some work that this is actually taken exactly from an ongoing major research study called the Leadership Challenge. 2 gentlemen, Cruzes and Posner, have done this for decades. And what they do is they've asked this question time after time, and their answers, I think, reflect, the poll's gone now, very clearly what I think popped up in that poll. Honesty, number one, across the board, almost in any culture, in any place, you see honesty is one of the top ones, time after time. After that, it drops off a bit. So we had inspiring, probably a little higher. I think maybe that speaks to the sector we're in, perhaps. I think there is probably more inspiration sometimes in the community level work we do out there. But that there are traits out there that they're not necessarily technical traits. I mean, to be honest, to be inspiring, to be forward-looking, maybe a bit in that. Competent has that sense of getting things done, for sure. What strikes me about this, though, is that things that sometimes we think are really defining traits of leadership, being ambitious, like really having that drive, being dependable, being intelligent, I mean, isn't necessarily the highest rating, which is, save me time after time. But it's the idea that there are things out there that we think are probably more heart, more personal, more people-oriented parts of leadership that are just as important as those things that are perhaps technical or things that we admire when we talk about really great leaders. I think it's really, again, different one that's probably a bit of a caveat in this one too. The idea of being cooperative, rated quite lowly in their work. I think in a sector that probably has a higher value for at least coordinated action, maybe cooperative action, we might rate that a bit higher, and it was on our chart as well too. So things to think about. Those are things that there's a lot of ways to define those traits. We'll come back to this time after time, I think, throughout this whole conversation today. But the things that what we think are important, there are some, I think, let's say standards, but ones that are quite common across the sector as well. One of the challenges about doing leadership work, as I mentioned, the front end, is just to define what leadership is. You could, pull out 1,000 books on leadership or Google it and find many different definitions. And that's great, because I think there isn't a one size fits all solution. There's not one size fits all parameters what leadership is. I'm gonna give you 2, because I think these sort of give you a bit of sense of 2 of the polarities or 2 of the tensions that we find in leadership. First one's from McKinsey. Leadership is a set of behaviors used to help people align their collective direction, to execute strategic plans, and to continually renew an organization. Sounds a lot like a leader in my mind. It's the idea of you have that idea to work with people, you're working on planning a strategic sense and making this sort of what you do refines over time. Probably some technical skills here. This is ones, I think these are learnable skills, the ones that come with experience. The contrary to that, though, is that there's a side of leadership that's an art. And this is Paul Hawken's view of leadership. It is leadership is the art of making problems so interesting and the solutions so constructive that everybody wants to get to work to deal with them. And not that one is right. I would argue you need both styles and probably other definitions as well. That there are those things of the getting things done, knowing how to do the work, knowing how to lead people, knowing how to create and work strategically. There's also that side of leadership that is that inspirational, that artistic side, that part that you can't quite define it, but you know when it's there. And we'll all bump up against leaders or work for leaders or be leaders, I think, too, in our careers that sort of lean into both these pieces. And some will have strengths in some ways, and we'll say, well, I'm not very inspiring. I think that's not always the case, but we'll lead in different styles. And as we sort of work with these tensions, these different definitions, to keep those in mind, it's not a one size fits all solution to our definition, I guess, to what leadership is. Over to you, Leslie, to walk us through, I think, the next part of this.
So we've been hearing about this leadership crisis and the lack of both the number of leaders and the quality of leaders. And again, not to say there isn't some amazing leaders out there, but we really haven't invested in leadership development in our sector in an intentional and strategic way. And of course, when there isn't great leadership within an organization, you're really operating in survival mode, right? You're just trying to stay afloat, floundering along. But I want to talk for a little bit about this concept of leadership from a variety of different locations within an organization. That leadership is not a title. Leadership is truly a behavior. You can lead up, you can lead down, you can lead across. You can lead from anywhere, actually, in an organization. And you may have had the experience, some of us certainly had, where you've worked in an organization where the top leader was actually very weak. And the real leader of the organization or leaders of the organization was really more at that mid to senior management level. That's who people trusted. That's who people listened to. That's who people followed. So, this title thing, while you may have the responsibility to be a leader, given the title that you have, certainly that's not where all the leaders are located within an organization. The good thing is it also means that you don't have to wait until you are in a recognized, leadership position to develop your leadership skills, of course. We can all be working all the time on developing our leadership skills. And, just for fun, if you ever want to listen to a cute little TED Talk, it's called The Lollipop Moment. If you Google that, it will come up. And it tells the story about everyday leadership and how all of us actually can be leaders in our own environments and in our own roles, and how important it is to foster leadership throughout our organizations. But I want to dig into this a little bit more and talk about different kinds of leadership and how that compares to some of the other functions that exist within our organizations. So, you might be a program manager, or you might be responsible for a project or have a team or whatever. And in all of these roles, it's good to think about your leadership effectiveness. And I want to talk a little bit about management and leadership. And sometimes we hear the term management versus leadership. And I prefer to think of it as management and leadership, because I think they're not opposing, but I do think there's some differences. Traditionally, we think of leaders as the people with a vision, and managers are the people who have to implement that vision. Two different roles, potentially, but both very critical to the success of your organization. And managers can be great leaders, and leaders can be great managers. Although if leaders are not great managers, they better make sure they have great managers around them. Some of you may have had the experience of working for an extremely visionary leader, those people who just have these, ideas, and everybody's kind of running around behind them, trying to keep up. If those kinds of leaders don't surround themselves with really good implementers, then their organization is not going to achieve what they would like it to achieve. Sometimes in smaller organizations, you just don't have the luxury of having those roles and functions in different positions. So you might have just one person whose responsibility is to be both the leader and the manager as well. And then sometimes in the bigger organizations, it gets split out. But managers can certainly be great leaders. Leaders don't have to be great managers, but if they're not, they better surround themselves with people who are. Also wanted to just chat a little bit about governance and leadership. And again, different roles, different functions. As a leader, we're typically that's the capacity to lead, but governance is actually a function it's pretty much in nonprofits assigned to your board of directors. Now, governors, your board of directors, they can be leaders. They should be leaders, but their functions and roles are assigned to them based on, legal structures, and they have some very clear responsibilities that they are required to perform. So I don't have time to delve into the, boards and versus leaders of organizations. Certainly, it's typically a pretty hot topic for certainly a lot of executive directors and CEOs. But we often think about it as kind of this hierarchical structure where you have, the board, and then you have your CEO or executive director, and then you have the rest of the management groupings. And I just wanted to bring an analogy from Joan Gary. I don't know if you've ever heard of Joan Gary. She's a nonprofit consultant. She writes a lot of blogs. And she uses this analogy of describing the relationship as it's really like a twin engine jet with the executive director and the board as co-pilots. So they're going in the same direction. They have, but they have different roles that are supporting each other. And I really like this analogy because it takes out that hierarchy, because that's really based on a, 1800s model of nonprofits. But there's certain things that the board is responsible to do, absolutely. But there's certain things that the top leader of your organization is also responsible to do. But one of the best indicators of the health of a nonprofit is the relationship between the top staff and the board of directors. So something to think about. I wanted to move on and talk a little bit about the 3 domains of leadership. I think we can agree that a great leader, regardless of where they sit in the organization, can take an average group and really make them an excellent team. And conversely, a bad leader can really ruin a great group. But as Mike already mentioned, we mostly leave this leadership development a bit to chance, when really it's probably one of the most important investments for the future of our sector. So I want to talk about 3 domains in terms of how we might want to approach this. And there's lots of ways to split this, but we're going to talk about leading ourselves, leading our organization, and then leading in the broader community. I'm just going to touch on each of these areas. And I'm going to start with leading ourselves. As Mike already mentioned, leadership is it's very much a personal journey. It's one that I know I am always trying to learn from my mistakes and figure out where I need to focus my energies, and, learning from the peers around me. Certainly it can be hard, it can be challenging, but it also can be joyful, and you really get to make an impact. So it is a privilege, in my opinion. But nobody's perfect. Often we learn from the school of hard knocks, but we can create a path for ourselves about our leadership journey. So it all starts with knowing yourself. So knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Of course, that's a very old quote, but I think it's really true when you talk about leadership. Ira Chaliff, he wrote The Courageous Follower, if you've read that book, says, assuming responsibility for our own development starts with a self-assessment. We need to know where we are before we can figure out in which direction to grow. And there's thousands of self-assessment tools out there. You have probably done some on your own. Strength Finder 2.0, 360s, all those kinds of things. Some are fun, some are kind of frivolous, some are very intensive, some are very comprehensive. And they all can be very worthwhile in terms of providing information. But just a note of caution, our view of ourselves may not match others. You may know Corey Olnick. He worked in leadership development his whole life. He used to say, maintain the courage to interrogate reality. Sometimes it's really important that we find out how people really feel about how we're doing. And this takes courage. So similar to how we all think we're great drivers, as leaders, we tend to think we're inspiring and motivating. But some sobering stats, a Forbes survey found that 65% of employees would forgo a pay raise if it meant seeing their leader fired. Yikes. And another Gallup survey said that over 80% of employees found their leaders fundamentally uninspiring. So this is something to think about. It's really important to get feedback from those around us so we are clear on the areas in which we really want to focus. As the saying goes, when things are going well, look out the window and acknowledge that it's a team effort. When things aren't going well, look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. So as Peter Drucker says, you can't manage other people unless you manage yourself first. It's always really important to start with this idea of self-awareness. There's some interesting research out there. There's lots, but I want to introduce you to this one research that I found from McKinsey. And it's called Decoding Leadership, What Really Matters. Because I think it can be pretty overwhelming to figure out. So, okay, I want to develop myself as a leader. Where do I start? And so they did this pretty interesting leadership. And you'll start to see coming up on the screen these different leadership behaviors. So they created a list of 20 distinct leadership traits, as they called them. These ones that are coming up on the screen. And then they surveyed 189,000 people across 81 diverse organizations all over the world. So this is not just about nonprofits, but I think there's some pretty interesting applicable information here. And then they compared the results to organizations whose leadership performance was considered very strong, so their leadership was very effective, compared to organizations where they felt leadership was ineffective, and they used this standardized scale to make that distinction between those who were super effective and those who weren't. And they found that leadership effectiveness really came down to 4 key leadership behaviors. And that these 4 behaviors explained 89% of the difference between the really strong, effective leaders and those who weren't. So interesting. And you may not agree with this, but I think it's just something to think about. And the 4 key leadership traits that they identified were being supportive. So being supportive and understanding and having relationships with people, being authentic, sincere, that kinds of things. So really getting to know the people that you work with on a personal level. Operating with strong results orientation. And I think in our sector, we may have different ways of measuring results, but we are all here to make a difference and have impact. So it's not about just having a vision. It's about also having impact. And so making sure that that turns into a reality. Seeking different perspectives. This allows us to bring in more information and variety of information and really can help in the decision-making process. And, this is an interesting one, and I'll tell you a story about Blockbuster first, and then I'll tell you a little bit about some personal experience. So I don't know if some of you probably aren't old enough to remember Blockbuster, but Blockbuster used to be like on the top of business in terms of, Friday night, everybody went and got their movies for the weekend. And then they failed massively. They went from being a $1 billion organization to going bankrupt. And when they did really a dissection of how did that happen, what they found was that their key senior leadership team was this well-oiled machine. They were very effective. The problem is they all thought similar, and they did not let in diverse opinions and perspectives. So they failed to recognize that the environment around them was changing very quickly, and therefore they didn't adapt, and that's why they went bankrupt. But they had this team that was working very well, and in the team's opinion was very effective, but it was closed to outside perspectives. So the importance of seeking different perspectives. I worked on a team that I thought we just had this dream team. We were high performers, we all got along. Again, we all thought very similarly. And when we did some culture work with our organization, what came to light, this is about, having the courage to interrogate reality, is the staff were all terrified of us. They just thought every time we had a meeting, they thought, oh my God, there they go again, because our expectations were not very realistic. So it was a really good learning experience for me to recognize that while it's easier and sometimes more fun to hire people that think like you, that's actually not going to make you as effective a leader. And we really need to hire for diverse perspectives if we want to make good decisions. And then the fourth one was solving problems effectively. And part of that is, related to information, of course, gathering information from a variety of perspectives. But, there's tools and resources that we can all learn that can help us solve problems more effectively, whether it's a big issue like, what do we do about this program that's not succeeding as we would like to, a dispute between two colleagues. So, and of course, different situations require, different leadership traits, and what might work in one situation may not be quite as effective in the other. But if you're thinking about your own leadership development, I thought this is kind of interesting research to reflect on these 4 core leadership traits and whether or not you think this might be an area of interest for you. So I'm going to turn it back to Mike, and he's going to talk about leadership within your organization.
Oh, classic. You gotta unmute.
You muted me. That's the problem. I think
I'm sorry.
that's the thing. Excellent leadership, Liz. That compliment stuff. I think as we walk through these, you'll recognize that these are nested concepts. When we talk about leadership of self, or leadership of organization, or leadership in the systems or community level, that it's not distinct language. Sometimes they are nested. They are interconnected. It's just how they play out and how we frame things. So the second level, or nested sort of little bubble we have here, is about leading organizations. I think this is where we see, when you ask people who leaders are in the sector, a lot of times you think about people who lead organizations. I think it's a little narrow, as Leslie pointed out in that slide. There's leadership can come from a lot of places. And I would argue some of the best leaders I see and know today are not people who have a CEO or executive director title beside their name. They are people who lead because that is who they are. So this organizational level leadership, that's a huge range of activities. When we started mapping out our leadership program, so to speak, or our offering, it was we sort of brainstormed what are the things in each of these buckets, each 3 domains we wanted to talk about. And the one on organizational leadership probably had 50 or 60 topics. We can talk about financial leadership, we can talk about management pieces, governance, GR, staff. So it's endless what you can do with things. There's a huge range of pieces that fit within this. And as Leslie explained, some are management, some are leadership. They are not opposed to each other. I think there are different ways of working systems and working with people. So large range of styles in this one, large range of competencies that go within, all the things that I think we sort of have touched on here, and many, many more that sort of work at that organizational leadership. And that depends on the type of organization you are, the type of where you want to be. There's different styles of organizational leadership that are being challenged right now. And even as we work into different cultural practices, I think we'll see a lot more of that shift over the next few years or coming years. A lot of times leadership in organizations does begin positionally. You get hired, either to run a team, to run a department, to run some sort of project, maybe to run the organization. So there are aspects of it that go with title, but that's not the limits of it. That's not the end of it. The mixture of skills, I think, starts to really play into I think some part of this conversation as well here too. There are hard and soft skills, and that maybe not be the best way to frame them sometimes. I think there are skills we have out there that are almost technical. You need to get things done. You need to know how to make a plan. I need to know how to make a budget sometimes, things like that. A lot more of it falls into that softer skill area. How do I actually work with a team? How do I lead people? How do I bring my own self to this situation? How to bring my own strengths and weaknesses and failures to a question, to lead an organization and do it well. So that mixture of skills in lead organizations is a huge, broad, and I think always changing dynamic for us. But there are some, and again, this is a place where you could go to 1,000 leadership textbooks and find 1,000 different models. I think models are great, or practices or frameworks are great. Pick and choose what fits you. I think a mix and match. I'm going to give you a summary of some from the gentleman who wrote the Leadership Challenge. And I think this is why I like these. They tend to align with the personal side, but they don't necessarily sit. Sometimes you can think of these concepts or these practices being an effective leader as they fit only at the senior level. I would argue that they fit at any level. I work with a team of folks here who every day I'm amazed at the way they do this type of work without probably using this kind of language. So the first of these sort of practices, they would say, is to model the way. And as we started with the idea that it's about self, and Leslie talked about, I think, quite well, is that if you don't understand yourself, if you don't know who you are and how you lead, you can't lead others. But it's not just about that sense of integrity. It's the idea that you need to model the way. If I'm not seen to be a good leader, why would I expect anybody to follow me? Why would I expect people to do things that I wouldn't do? There are no small or unimportant jobs in an organization. And if my leadership style is to say that I only do the important or profile things, then I think that's not a way that's going to encourage anybody or inspire anybody. And I'm probably working alone all my life here. And the idea that you're going to follow the person, not the plan. You may have the best designed plan or the sexiest looking organization out there, but unless you've got that sense of I'm here to lead and people are going to, I understand who I am, it's really hard for people to follow me. So to find your own voice and to give voice to your values, I think is where it starts from. And that's a scary thing for folks sometimes to say, well, what do I have to offer in this space? Or do I understand who I am, what my values are? But unless you have that deep-rooted sense of what I bring to the table, it's really hard to model away and to lead others. Moving beyond that is the idea this is very much a shared game. Leadership or any organizational type work, I would argue, is a shared game. It's a team sport. When we talk about shared visions, that really is the job of sometimes with leadership. It is the idea that every organization begins with a dream. We all like to sort of say that I've got a way we can do things better, whether it's from the very foundational pieces or building new programs, taking us to the next level. And that's part of leadership, is to breathe life into those hopes and dreams. But it's not an individual pursuit. This is very much a shared pursuit. The idea of heroic leadership, where you have the one leader that takes you from here to there. I mean, maybe that happens sometimes. And I think there are situations perhaps when you need that kind of single independent leader. I did my master's in leadership. I worked for the gentleman who's a fire chief, and he is very much the leader of that organization. He enters the room, people stand up and give him the chair. There is no debate about what's the best way to run a fire. That's pretty selective, though. I think for most of the things that we work with in nonprofits, that idea of the heroic leader is probably less valued, or less valuable, or less appropriate in some ways. We may still have the image of the heroic leader, and there's a lot of stuff that we do to promote certain leadership people or styles. But the idea that in the long run, this is a team game. Shared leadership takes you a lot farther than, I think, heroic leadership. So the idea in leadership to me is to give it away, is how do you make it possible for others to lead? How do you say that the ideas you have, the visions, the dreams you have, and my job is to put it in that collective harness so we're all pulling the same way, which is towards what we want to do as an organization. The third piece is to challenge the processes. I think one of the inherent traits of leadership, and this can be really broad as to where we go with this, is to challenge processes, is to challenge the status quo. Good things don't just happen when you run an organization. You've got to kick open some doors. You've got to be at tables. You've got to take some risks. And to create the conditions for those things to happen is a big part of leadership. And that can be, I think, a comfortable place for some folks. I think some folks are great being out there. And for others, it's harder. It's harder to enter a conversation where you're not quite sure what you're bringing to it or who you are, what's in it for you. That challenging in the broadest sense is both an internal and an external activity. It's internal, certainly for the personal side of things. How do I look at myself and try and drive things a little further down the road? How to look at my organization and say, who are we together and where do we want to go? And then for a lot of organizations is how do we challenge things outside of organizations, the systems, the community, the government departments we work with. But it's not about creating endless new ideas. We can all have ideas. Ideas are easy. We're doing some strat planning these days internally. We got 1,000 ideas. And when we do strat planning for the organizations, it's how to say no. The hard part of strategy is not saying yes to things, it's saying no. And allowing those things along that idea, that a pathway that is really where you want to go to. So it's not about endless ideas, it's about recognizing and supporting good ideas and those people who bring them to you. So we move beyond the status quo so we can always be a bit better. And the last framework is this. This is just about relationship. It's encouraging the heart. Again, it is that those that you want to lead need to know that they are valued and believed in, and there's a trust element to this and a respect element to it. So at the heart of it, leadership is about relationships. It's not about command and control. It's not about position. It's not about your experience. It's not about your Twitter feed. It's not about all those things that sometimes you look at and say, that is a leader. To me, this is about leadership it's about who you are and who you are with people. So creating that culture, that sense of appreciation and encouragement is tough, and it's intentional work. And it's something that is easily, at least for me, easily forgotten some days when you get busy with 1,000 things to do and other things going on. How do you move beyond that sort of bubble that I create for myself to reach out to others and say, how am I encouraging? How am I appreciating you? And how am I receiving it too? Because both of the things are just a two-way street. Sometimes leadership tends to look like a one-way street. It is very much a two-way street as we walk through all of this. So again, lots of frameworks out there. There'll be pieces that you can sort of pick and choose. But again, that's the notion. This is a pursuit, a passion, a lifelong kind of goal for ourselves to sort of find out what resonates and how do we want to build our own leadership for ourselves and for the organizations we serve. The last domain, and we're just going to touch on this quickly, is that leading in community. And we can call this a few different things. It could be leading the systems level. This is a really broad one. So you're moving from that self to organization to the broadest concept of where we are out there in our communities, our systems. You know, we don't work in a vacuum. No matter who we are, there's we all are dependent on other parts of the world to sort of figure out, you know, how to do our work or inform our work or to get clients or funding, all those kind of things. So no one works alone. So part of it is we can be pretty, you know, we can be pretty isolated and do our things, keep our heads down, serve our clients, write our funding reports, end of the day. A lot of times, though, I think we're being called to sort of say, what do we do that moves beyond our organization? And we can do work beyond our organization that certainly serves our organization. There's times when I sit on committees or go to panels, do whatever I want. I know it's going to benefit IntegralOrg. Fair enough. That's probably a bit of an organizational level. There's times, though, when we need to start to work at that bigger systems community level because it's the right thing to do, or it advances our missions, maybe not our organization. And there's a book called Forces for Good, came out maybe 15 years ago. Wonderful understanding of how high impact nonprofits are built. But they would argue that you need to be a high impact organization, you need to be focused on both service delivery and advocacy. And advocacy is written quite broadly in this construct. So that I think service delivery gives us that credibility, the boots on the ground. We know the needs of clients, we know the needs of community, we have that sense of we know what's out there. That moving towards advocacy written large here is that we need to start to move the system, whether that's advocacy in the sense of government relations, maybe it's collective impact, maybe it's some of the systems change work we're seeing out there right now, that what do we do to move upstream a bit? So we're not simply delivering services. I'm not sure that's even simple, but the idea that how do we sort of move to root causes? So holding both of those types of work together, they're not separate from each other, but they do very much depend on each other to do it really well. There's lots of activities in this area that align with this. You've seen language change over the years. We've been around long enough. You used to have collective impact. That's probably dropped off a bit. System change, you know, a lot of the lab work is happening out there. Really good stuff, but it moves us beyond sort of programmatic or individual kind of organizational work to what do we do collectively. Public policy fits in this realm, all kinds of stuff. I would say this is probably the, you know, an area of leadership that I think a lot of people try to evolve into over time. You get people who've been around for a while time and say, well, what do you think we change the whole model? So again, another view of leadership that we want to sort of put on the table. But there are parts of leadership that I think we misunderstand. So I'm going to turn it back to Leslie to talk about some of the myths perhaps that are out there about leadership.
Oh, and thank you to unmute. Yes. Okay. So as Mike mentioned, there's lots of misperceptions or misconceptions or myths about leadership, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them. Some of them we've already touched on today. And the first one is about leadership, of course, coming from a title, and that you can't lead if you aren't at the top of your organization. And I'd encourage us to really think about how do we develop leaders at all parts of our organization. And if you aren't in a designated leadership position, to really think about how do you develop your leadership skills and traits. That's an area of interest to you. And second one is there is one best style of leadership. And we often think of leaders as these, charismatic, extroverted people. But that certainly doesn't work in all situations. And there's a whole stream of thought around situational leadership where you have to be able to adjust your style to meet the situation and environment in which you're currently based. And some of the best leaders out there are really those quiet, thoughtful people who, when they talk, it's with a lot of wisdom and people actually listen. And we can all think of, horror stories of charismatic leaders that have led people to very tragic consequences. And so it's not about, one best style. Everybody can be a leader. And that brings us to the third one is that, the myth that leaders are born somehow, that, people are just natural leaders. And while I think there are some people who maybe are more comfortable in their role or lean into their role, we all can develop leadership traits and behaviors. And it is a never-ending journey. but again, starting with your self-awareness. And the fourth one is about confidence. And this has been an interesting one for me to think about, this myth that leadership requires confidence. And research shows that the overlap between confidence and competence is only about 9%. It's actually really low. And when we were doing our previous leadership development work, we assumed that as you developed somebody's competence, or as they felt their competence developed, their confidence would increase. What we actually found was the opposite. As people's confidence increased, their competence actually went up. And so it's not confidence is not a prerequisite. And I'm sure many of you have had a similar experience where you feel like the imposter, where I just had these situations where I'm like, I don't know why people think I can do this. This imposter syndrome where you think you're in a position with a leadership requirement that you're not sure you're quite ready to actually fulfill. But there is something to be said about, fake it till you make it. We all have the experience of not maybe feeling that we have the confidence to do the job. But it's not a requirement of being an effective leader. And it's something that can grow. And the last one is that good leaders don't fail. And I would say this is absolutely not true. I think good leaders fail all the time. I was trying to find some stats, and they're very general, but the estimate is between 30 and 50% of nonprofit leaders get fired at some point in their career. And that does not mean they're not a good leader. It does not mean necessarily, even if that was their fault. Lots of things can happen. It's what people do with that experience. It's how they're able to, pick themselves up and dust themselves off and learn from it while continuing to move forward. And that's really the important part. And lastly, I just want to touch on the importance of being human. This is an interesting article, Harvard Business Review by Rasmus Hugard, and it's called "Why Do Managers Forget They're Human Beings?" And I think he makes some really interesting points that the power of leadership is ultimately about being human. We don't have to be superheroes and wear capes and be martyrs and all those kinds of things. The most important thing, and Mike alluded to this, is about the relationships and being human. So being personal, and when making decisions, think about, if who the people that's going to impact. What if that was my friend, my son or daughter, my spouse? Would I make that same decision? And so taking into consideration the emotional part of decisions doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have to make hard decisions that not everybody's going to be happy about. But take that into consideration. Think about, how does this impact people? Being self-aware, we spent quite a bit of time talking about that, but the importance of being able to lead yourself first and foremost. Being selfless, I think leadership's not about you. And we've all seen examples of people who are in leadership positions whose narcissistic characteristics get them into lots of trouble. This doesn't mean, though, you're a doormat or that you're a complete martyr. It does mean you need to look after yourself as well. And then being compassionate. When people feel like you have their back and that they could trust you, they will be much more inclined to, be committed and to follow you with vision and the mission that you have. And I would add, most importantly, while you're being passionate, don't forget to have fun. Enjoy the journey. There's no need to be perfect. Ultimately, it's about human leadership, but be a human first. So I'd like to hear from you. Reflecting back, we've tried to throw together a whole bunch of concepts here, introduced a bunch of ideas, many of which will not be new to you. But reflecting on yourself as a leader, we're going to do a quick poll here. What trait would you most like to develop? Again, it's going to be a Slido. So you can either scan the screen or go to slido.com. And you can put in a one word, or you can put in like a couple of words to describe what trait you would most like to develop. So I encourage everyone to participate.
And I'll also add that as you see some of the submissions being posted up here, you can vote on them and kind of support some other answers if someone said something that you were going to enter anyways.
Getting a bit of a word cloud here come up.
Yep.
No, these are great answers. I love the diversity here, and I think what it does reflect is the complexity of human leadership. There's just not a couple of things we all just need to figure out. It's diverse, it changes, and it truly is a never-ending journey. Awesome. Look at that. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to turn you over to Sandeep, and Sandeep's going to tell you a little bit more about the exciting leadership development program coming up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Leslie and Mike, for a very informative session on the practice of leadership in the nonprofit sector. My name is Sandeep, and I am the Leadership Development Coordinator here at IntegralOrg. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce the Elevated Leadership Development opportunity being offered by IntegralOrg. So elevated leadership is an agile and responsive experience that is less about delivering a curriculum and more about responding to you and your organization's needs in real time. Over the course of 7 full days, you will explore leadership in the context of self, organization, and community. Spread out over 6 monthly sessions with the final follow-up session, this delivery model creates the space for you to learn, practice, engage feedback throughout the learning experience. You will have the opportunity to better understand yourself as a leader, learn a balance of theory and practical tools that you can apply to your organization's most pressing issues, unpack topics like developing an impactful team, setting strategic direction, communicating your organization's impact, nurturing strong relationships with stakeholders, and managing change. And you will leave with a better understanding of leadership within the broader community and how to support the sector's needs to continue making an impact. Elevated leadership is crafted for the sector, by the sector, and delivered by our expert facilitators, Mike Grogan and Leslie Tamagi, who you already know bring a wealth of experience to the subject. We'll be joined by guest speakers and panelists who will address a variety of sector-specific topics like the leadership journey, team building, people and culture, government relations, systems thinking, and more. This learning experience will also be delivered as a cohort, which means participants will have the opportunity to develop a community of peer learners. For those of you who have participated in cohort learning before, you know that these relationships go well beyond the experience and serve as a network of support and collaboration for long term. Coming out of a pandemic where folks have been feeling isolated in their initiatives and challenges, this is a wonderful opportunity to strengthen a sense of community and support in our sector. We are so excited to present this offering to you all. I know all of us are here because we care about the impact that our organizations have, and we care about bringing our best selves to our work. It's a privilege for us at IntegralOrg to bring this experience to those of you who are at the helm of moving folks towards a shared vision and mission. So the intake for elevated leadership begins June 21st. Each of you will receive more information about the opportunity and how to apply via email. I will mention that this is an in-person opportunity based in Calgary. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to receive them at the email and phone number noted on the screen here for you. And once again, we're so excited to be bringing this learning opportunity to you all. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.
And thank you, Sandeep. I think it is certainly, we're excited about this opportunity. And this, as we go on, as I said, a sense of humility, be a little daunted, but also really excited about what this could be. I think the chance to learn alongside people. This is not something we're going to, impart a ton of information where you sit. This is about us learning together and putting some structure to it. The cohort model, the the idea that I did my master's in leadership at Royal Roads, and you do a cohort model there. And I often thought I would go back and do that again. That idea of learning with people, that is an iterative, lifelong pursuit. And so we want to thank you for considering this. But thank you for your time first of all today. I mean, to spend an hour on a, wow, what else you can do? It's cold and rainy out there. You're not going outside anyway. But we do thank you for being here. Anything we do, it's always a privilege to have people join us in what we do, and we take that very seriously. As we move forward in this, a lot of our work is to help other organizations and people in this sector do their work better, through whether it's our work in strategy or governance, legal side, and leadership. We do hope that we do run into here and there, and that you join us in what we do. Any questions, reach out to Sandeep, reach out to myself, just have some conversations. And again, as we go forward with this, I hope you have a great day, and we really hope to see you soon. Thanks, folks.